Welcome to the Lean Solutions Podcast. This is the podcast that adds value to leaders by helping you improve performance using process improvement solutions with bottom line results. My name is Patrick Adams, and this season I'll be joined by three other amazing hosts, including Catherine McDonald from Ireland, Andy Ulrich from Australia, and Shane Doffenbaugh from the United States. Join us as we bring you guests and experiences of lean practitioners from all over the world. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Lean Solutions Podcast, led by your hosts, Catherine McDonald and myself, Patrick Adams. How's it going, Catherine?
I am very well, Patrick. Thanks.
Good. Well, I'm excited about today's topic. We have a new guest on the show that's coming in all the way from Alaska, and we're going to talk specifically about mistakes that young leaders make. So, in conversations centered around emerging leaders, we always talk about these common mistakes that are often encountered, especially with young leaders who are either new to the organization, or maybe they're emerging leaders that have been promoted and are now starting to rise up in the company. But from striving for perfection to learning how to embrace errors, the leadership journey reflects aspects of growth and resilience. And the discussion today is going to blend the insights of experienced leaders with the enthusiasm of emerging ones. And we're going to illustrate different mistakes and talk about that in different industries, including the military, which Phil is a 24-year veteran. So I'm excited to have him on the show. But the conversation is going to highlight a transformative power of errors, of turning them into stepping stones, and then future leadership excellence. So I'm super excited about today's discussion. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to talk about some really cool stuff. So, Catherine, do you want to take a minute and just introduce Phil to the show?
Yes, I would love to. So, as you said, Patrick, Phil Ranck is a retired 24-year United States Army veteran from Pennsylvania. He excels in Lean Six Sigma methodologies and holds certificates such as the Certified Department of the Army Master Black Belt, and he holds accreditations from IASSC, the ASQ, and CSSC. Very impressive. With a background in military management and program acquisition, coupled with a master's degree in transportation and logistics management, Phil has trained numerous students in green and black belt certifications. And this has led to very impactful projects. So his commitment to clear processes for change is reflected in additional certifications in design thinking, business process reengineering, and change management from institutions like IBM, IDEO, and Virginia State University. Phil, where do you get time to work with all this study? I don't know. In 2019, Phil founded Lean Alaska upon retiring from the Army, focusing on delivering quality, personalized interactions and fostering a community of Lean Six Sigma practitioners. Well done, and welcome to the show, Phil.
Thanks so much. As I'm listening to you say that, I'm asking myself the same question and then realizing, like, wow, that makes me sound a lot smarter than I really am. Like, it doesn't have in the bio as, oh, by the way, list all of those mistakes that we were talking about as through all of those different techniques. So, yeah, I think that highlights the positives for sure. Yeah. But thanks for that. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
That reminded me of a picture, Phil, that I saw. I don't know if it was an iceberg or something, where you see the success at the top, but you don't see everything underneath it that it took to get there. All the failures, all the learnings, all the development, all the struggles, all the challenges, right? That actually took you to get to the point of what people actually see now.
Yeah. And it's funny how that works, because I'd love to say that all of those things were, like, oh, I want to be better. I want everything. It wasn't a matter of desire that drove me to all of those. It was more of a question, or again, answering something where it was simply curiosity that drove me to all those areas. I see you have this over here and this over here, but I don't understand where they come together. So I just start learning and I start just trying to understand the differences. And then I get questions again, as we're going to talk about today, from leaders. And, it's really hard to mentor a leader if you don't have the background and understanding yourself. So, as we'll talk about, I teach, I train, I certify. And one of the biggest questions I get is, well, what's the difference? What is process improvement? And what's the difference of all the things that are in there? And, we use these terms, but where are the parallels? Where are the separations? And I was like, well, guess I better read a book or I'm not going to be able to answer that question really well.
Right, right. I love that you hit on the point about having experience to back when you're teaching, when you're coaching someone. Unfortunately, there's a lot of consultants or coaches that are out there that have a lot of they're very book smart. They've read a lot of books. They've maybe attended a couple workshops or things like that, but they don't have the experience, the boots on the ground of being there in the trenches, working through these things and experiencing what you've experienced and Catherine and I have experienced and many other practitioners that are listening. And that's unfortunate, right? So, but I love that the fact that you pointed that out as an important part of being a good coach is the experience part of it, of actually going and trying for yourself and learning. It's an important piece for sure. Phil, before we dive into the conversation today about young leaders and mistakes that young leaders make and how does process improvement help with some of that? I want to talk about Lean Alaska because I think everybody loves Alaska. When you hear the word Alaska, people's ears perk up and they want to hear more. I've been to Alaska a number of times. You and I have talked about this. And it's just an amazing place. And you mentioned to us before we hit record today that this is your favorite time of year because the sun is shining, it's warm out, but you can still get your snow machine out, which in Michigan we call snowmobile. So snowmobile, snow machine. Both of us are snowmobilers, but tell us what it's like there in Alaska right now, this time of year.
It's just beautiful. And I think the biggest thing about Alaska is the diversity of the seasons. You spend 6 months in winter and you spend 6 months, well, not really 6 months, it's like 4 in summerish, but there's such a stark difference. In winter, it's almost 24 hours of darkness. In summer, it's 24 hours of daylight. So this time of the year, especially now that we just had the daylight savings time, like it doesn't get dark here until almost 9:30 at night. And then it's light again by 6 here in about a month. It'll be 24 hours of daylight for us. So there's still snow on the ground. There's still snow-capped mountains, and you can still do winter things without freezing to death because it's, we're right around the freezing temperatures. So as I mentioned yesterday, we got done class and the freedoms that come along with retirement as well as, being able to walk away from what we're doing. And we all hopped on our snowmobiles, or we call them snow machines here. And we took about a 25-mile ride out to a glacier. We took a picnic with us, went to an ice cavern, had a really nice picnic as a family, and then came home. And when we got home at 9 o'clock at night, it's still daylight out. So, I mean, those are just day-to-day adventures in Alaska.
Wow. I love it. Love it. I think we're going to talk, obviously we're going to dive into process improvement and those types of things. But I want to, before we do, I want to just hear a little bit more about Lean Alaska, because this is obviously you live in Alaska, so that makes sense. But tell us just a little bit about what Lean Alaska does and, what was the motivation behind it? How did you start it? Kind of what types of things are you guys doing? Just give us an overview.
So yeah, try to make it a real short story. I never set out to run a business. It was actually kind of a mistake that it actually started. So again, in the military, and we'll talk about that, I spent 13 plus years doing process improvement or Lean Six Sigma. I served as a master black belt, which, had various roles and impacts. But right around 2 years before I decided to retire, I was here in Alaska and I was buying a book because I was teaching a greenbelt class. And when I was buying this, I was buying multiple. So we only have one Barnes and Noble in the state, so not a lot of places to go. So I stopped by there and they asked why I was buying so many books. Through a conversation, I had a few people asking me if what I did translated or could help them with their small businesses. Because, Alaska is very well known for its small businesses. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of these techniques that would apply. It doesn't have to be done at scale at corporations. It can help any kind of, process improvement. It's process improvement. And so they ended up taking my phone number and calling me back. So I started consulting before Lean Alaska name even existed. And it really wasn't consulting. I was just helping. I was taking what I knew and supporting. And then that lightly I was like, well, somebody has told me at some point, they're like, Phil, you're going to need a business license. I'm like, what's that? And they were like, oh, well, you got to fill out this paperwork. I'm like, oh, paperwork. I do that all the time in the Army. I'm good at that. So I kind of followed that path, and Lean Alaska grew basically out of necessity in Alaska. And then as I retired, that translated into more consulting. And then the consulting led to my soldiers still calling back, hey, are you still training? Well, I'm not in the Army anymore. Let me figure this out. And I figured out how to train soldiers again. So Lean Alaska just kept growing out of necessity. So now I spend 70% of my time training and certifying, primarily soldiers. A lot of industry is in there now as well, because the other 30% of the time I still consult. But Lean Alaska came out of that necessity for small businesses and then medium to large size businesses in the state, trying to figure out, how do we do better with the limited resources we have? You know, it's a unique entity. We don't have a railroad that comes in and out of this state. So anything that comes to us is either by barge or by air. Barge is very slow, air is very expensive. And, you know, we don't have a lot of natural resources that most have access to. So how do you overcome those complexities and those limitations? In comes process improvement.
Wow. I love it. Yeah, that's great. I love that you saw a need and you filled it. And I mean, so many small businesses in Alaska are so thankful for Lean Alaska and the work that you guys are doing. So, you know, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And while I'm on that, thank you for your service, by the way, 24 years in the United States Army. Very much appreciate that as well. And obviously, you know, there's not a lot of people that we get on the show that have been a master black belt in the military, that are applying process improvement in the military. So I'm really excited to hear some of your experiences. And obviously, you know, when you enlisted in the Army as a young soldier, you didn't know about Lean, as far as I know. That you were introduced in the beginning, but I'm sure you made lots of mistakes, not just in applying process improvement or learning process improvement, but mistakes in general in the Army. And as you're learning, as you're developing yourself as a leader, can you talk to us a little bit about, you know, some of those mistakes that you made as a young leader? And then later on, how maybe as you started to learn about process improvement tools and techniques, how that maybe helped to, not necessarily repair the mistakes, but help you to be able to maybe mentor others in who are experiencing some of the same things? Or how was process improvement able to help?
Yeah. Oh, God, we would need probably we need a month of podcast to cover the mistakes that I made as a young soldier. I mean, when I came in, I joined the Army when I was 17. I lived in a very small town in Pennsylvania, and it just wasn't a lot there. So it was a very big world. And when I went to my first duty assignment in Alabama, it was the first time I had ever left my state. So it was very new world to me, different culture, different people. But as a young soldier, mistakes were abound. And I was a young mechanic. I joined the Army to do something I understood how to do, which was work on cars. That was my background. And the mistakes. Wow. But mistakes were made. You know, when we talk about process improvement, no, I had no idea what Lean Six Sigma was back then. I'm not even sure it was around. I'm getting kind of older now, but it was around. I just didn't know what it was.
Right.
But I suffered from that, and my leaders suffered from that, from my actions. Even before I became a young leader, you know, my mistakes impacted them as leaders. And what was interesting, and I didn't realize it then until you look back at it now, was I made mistakes. Well, the guy next to me made mistakes, and the guy next to me made mistakes, and the gal next to him made mistakes. And that's 4 different parallels of everybody doing something differently that these leaders had to react to. But when I was a young soldier, you always kind of take it a little bit personally. You're like, why am I always getting yelled at for this? I don't understand. Because we as young soldiers didn't understand the complexity that the leader was dealing with, right? Leaders aren't responsible for one person. They're responsible for the masses, for all of us. And, you know, as soldiers, they weren't just responsible for our day-to-day actions at work. They were responsible for our home lives. Again, I was 17. These were like my surrogate parents at this point. And leadership took on a different leadership. And I say the word leadership because we'll talk about parallels in the words manager, leader, and leadership later. It was very different. I had leaders, then I had those that were in leadership, you know, that were leadership to me. And sometimes they weren't the same person. So, you know, and I didn't realize things. And when you work in process improvement, I worked in motor pools. So if I forgot a wrench or a tool, I'd have to walk back up to the motor pool and then walk back down to the line. When you're walking back and forth, what do you think I got yelled at for? Ranck, why is it taking you so long to fix that truck? Well, because I'm an idiot and I keep forgetting my wrenches, right? So we just, all right, we'll work faster. And their solution to that was run instead of walk. It wasn't like, hey, dummy cord it to your waist so it drags along with you. It was just move faster. So I started to recognize those. And as I got into that NCO role, which for us non-commissioned officers was that leadership role or that leader's role, I started to understand from those mistakes, like, oh yeah, you know what? I should probably tell him to do this a different way. I remember why I got yelled at, so let me take a different approach and understand it from their perspective, having come from that trench. And then I made this, and I was an NCO for a period of time. I started really getting into leadership, if you will, when we got into those first deployments, 2001, 2003, when Iraq and Afghanistan really became a thing. Again, here I am, young, early 20s, responsible for taking them through a combat situation. And that's when mistakes were really critical. There was no room for mistakes. So the question became, how do you anticipate making these mistakes? Well, the only way to anticipate a mistake is probably to have some experience in that. And one of the things I learned very quickly as an NCO was my experience was limited to my actions. And I understood as a leader that I needed to talk to everybody around me to understand what they experienced so I could capitalize on that, kind of like voice of the customer, right? You need to know what everybody else knows on the team. And then I made this shift about mid-career from an NCO to a warrant officer, which I became more of a program director, I think is probably a more apt description, where I would focus specifically on processes and programs for an organization and became an advisor, a lot like a consultant for the Army. Again, I had to start over. I had spent all those years becoming a leader as a non-commissioned officer. When I became a warrant officer, I was a new guy again. But I had to learn leadership roles and leaders' requirements from a whole new perspective, which allowed for all new mistakes. And those mistakes were too many assumptions. I assumed that I knew what everybody needed to know as opposed to clarifying what I needed to know. Overconfidence was a mistake that I was making. I was overconfident sometimes in the answers that I was giving without any kind of really validation of any kind. And assumptions and overconfidence being my mistakes led to the ability for those below me to make mistakes. And then the other mistake I made, as you can see these compounding, was not recognizing that their failures were due to the mistakes that I was making as a leader and how I was directing. They were looking to me for the answers. My answers guided their actions. If their actions resulted in something less than I was expecting at that time, pre-process improvement, I didn't understand that dynamic very well. And then as I grew, I was a logistician, and I spent all of my time in the military in the tactical world. I started jumping out of airplanes when I was 19 years old. So the Army just kept throwing me out of airplanes for 20 plus years. So I spent a lot of time in this tactical realm, meaning I was always at the forefront. I was always where the fight was happening, kind of a thing. And my support as a logistician was always to the infantrymen that you would see, right? Those really in harm's way. So again, mistakes matter. As a logistician, we provide the capability for them to do what they do. And it's like watching poetry in motion. These guys were amazing, but they kept coming back and they were like, where are the bullets? Where is the fuel? Where are the parts? You logisticians are horrible. And I kept looking at it and I was like, man, but the people aren't your problem. It's the process. You're a lot faster than we are because we're relying on outside entities. We all know how the global supply chain works, but in infantry world, that didn't matter. So I kept saying to myself, there's got to be a better way. And that's when I got introduced to process improvement. Process improvement not only taught me to look at a process instead of the people having the mistakes, but it also taught me how to educate my leadership at that point, to understand like, hey, when you're complaining because I can't get you something fast enough, it's not because I'm slow. It's because the process that I'm using and the space that you're giving me to operate in, they don't line up. And that's not because I personally didn't do something that needed to be done. It's because we haven't communicated properly to close that mistake gap, kind of a thing. So that's how I got into process improvement. Was I wanted to support my operators better. And I had to learn how to improve a process. Like you can only improve people so much. There's so much noise factor in there. You can tell a person to do something all day long. You can't force them to do it. You can't change their minds. So you create a process that enables them to hopefully focus themselves the right way. It's a little different. That was a lot of words. Let me pause there.
No, I love it.
Yeah, no, I mean, some of the mistakes that you talk about are, I mean, they're applicable to any leader really in any industry, as well as the military, things like just being overconfident, because sometimes you feel you have to be confident, that that's part of the job, that I have to look confident, and not realizing that it's okay to be, you know, a little bit vulnerable around people you trust and ask questions and look for feedback and say, I don't know, you know, all of these things. So, you know, a lot of the things that you talk about, well, I remember, and I'm sure lots of people listening, you know, remember themselves doing as well. And I think what you talked about in terms of process improvement and finding lean and process improvement, that's really interesting. And it would be interesting to hear a little bit more about that as well, because I suppose from my perspective, when I started into lean and process improvement, similarly to you, I found it as a sort of a way to look at this process and not the person, you know, which is kind of what, you know, you're relating to as well there, that it becomes not about blaming a person or who did what or didn't do what. It's about, let's look at our process together and work it out. So tell us a little bit about maybe your approach to that, and how, you know, that or maybe other aspects of lean maybe helped you to prevent or at least reduce some of the mistakes that were being made early on in your career.
Yeah. So, you know, I'll bring this back to my very first project, if you will, when I was just getting into the training aspect of it. And it was a result of mistakes that were being made and leadership perceptions in an organization. As a warrant officer, I managed what most know as a fleet management program, right? It was a field of vehicles that supported operations. Think UPS, think FedEx, right? I took care of their parking lot of vehicles, if you will, and that required reoccurring maintenance. Well, the people that were using these vehicles, they don't. It's a tool for them, right? It's not a primary means. It's something that they use to do their primary functions better. And the maintenance of these was always, you know, a little bit tricky in the military. It always has been. But when the things don't go wrong, they blame leaders. Just as I had been blamed when logistics didn't work well, logistics would blame leadership. Well, you're not making sure that soldiers take care of their equipment. You're not making sure that the drivers are taking care of their equipment. And no matter how many times I tried to change the people, it had no impact to the process that I was dealing with. And that's where, again, I started getting introduced. I heard somebody talking about process improvement. And it was very interesting. They said, we're going to stop focusing on people and we're going to focus on a process. And in my mind, I was like, what does that mean? You know, people, process, what's all this, you know, gibberish that he's talking about? And after about an hour and a half conversation, I was hooked. And I was like, I need to understand more of what you're saying. How do I separate the person? Because in my mind, leadership at this time, again, mistakes that I made, I assumed that leadership not being present to enforce, you know, processes to happen in my motor pools or in these fleet management areas was the problem. Well, as I started learning how to do root cause analysis and peel back that onion, and, you know, what impact do the leaders have? You know, what play do they have? We process map to figure out how do they interact. We start understanding what impacts do they have to the individuals doing the task. I quickly learned that leadership didn't even break the top 10 when it came to root cause analysis as to why processes were failing. It was how we managed paperwork. It was how we interacted with the people that were doing it and their ability to do the process. We asked them to do tasks without tools, right? That's like me telling you to open the hood of your car, change the battery, and all I'm going to give you is a rubber band, right? We're not MacGyvers. It doesn't work that way. And that's where our processes were failing. So I started seeing mistakes in these mistakes. And what I realized was, again, the mistake wasn't the person. It was the person standing there realizing that they couldn't do what they were being asked. And all the leaders were doing was breathing down their neck saying, do it faster. Fail faster is basically what they were telling them. And that's how I started to approach everything. And when I would get into meetings with leaders, you know, whether I was in a leadership role or there with others, and they would complain, this task didn't get done. Who was responsible? I'd always raise my hand. I'm like, how about we redirect that question? Instead of asking who was responsible, how about we ask why the process allowed them to fail in the first place? What did we miss? What guidance didn't we give them? So they, you know, they went. And my favorite thing that I tell everybody when we very first start classes, I'm like, how many of you think you need process improvement in your life? And very few of them raise their hand because they're new. I said, okay, how many of you sit in a meeting? And in this meeting, you have a big conversation about 2 hours, and there's a lot of guidance given. And then when the meeting's over, you get up, you walk outside of the room, and then everybody that was in the meeting has an external meeting in the hallway to discuss what the requirements were from the guidance you were given in the meeting. But now you're just missing the guidance giver. and everybody raises their hands. It's the meeting after the meeting to define what in there. That's an indication that the process wasn't given to you well enough to create an action. So now you're going to go forward, infer, and that's going to lead to a mistake. But because you didn't ask about the process, you're going to be the one held liable for the mistake, not the person that failed to give you clear and concise guidance. And that's, again, how I started molding my conversations and working with those that were below me. When I came down, if something was wrong, I didn't ask them why they did it wrong. I said, what guidance were you given to do this action? Did you feel it was clear and concise enough for you to execute whatever task it is you're being asked to execute? And what I always found very interesting as I transitioned, that question worked in this industry as well. Every manufacturer that I've worked with, when I've gone out to their floors or I've gone out in their shops or I've sat down with their leadership and I asked that same question, what's the clear and concise guidance that you're giving to avoid a mistake happening? We come across the same results. They're like, well, we told him to do something, but did you clarify something?
Yeah, I love it. And I love that your focus is so heavily on the process. And I think most people that understand lean and have been involved in continuous improvement for any time, hopefully would be in agreement with you on that we need to focus on the process, not on the people, when it comes to, why problems are happening, why we're having, failures and things like that. Hello, everyone. I am sorry to interrupt this episode of the Lean Solutions podcast, but I wanted to take a moment to invite you to pick up a copy of my Shingo award-winning book, Avoiding the Continuous Appearance Trap. In the book, I contrast the cultures of two companies I worked for. And though each started with similar lean models, one was mechanistic and only gave the appearance of lean, while the other developed a true culture of continuous improvement. The contrast provides a vivid example of the difference between fake lean and true lean. You can find the book on Amazon. Simply search my name or the title of the book. You aren't a reader? No worries. The audiobook is also available on Audible. Now, back to the show. I also want to ask you about the people side of things too, because there is a huge piece of this that does fall onto people development. I know we had Brian Tierney on from Seating Matters a few weeks ago, and he talked a lot about lean being a people system, a people development system. And so I want to ask you too, in the Army, as you started to move up in the ranks and you became an NCO and then a warrant officer, I have to imagine that while you were also working on process stuff, again, as you started to understand process improvement, you were also doing a lot of coaching, mentoring, training of soldiers. So what did that look like, and how has your process for mentoring people, how has that developed over the years? What would you say is your approach to developing or mentoring people in the right way?
Yeah, and that's such a great question. And you're right. I look at these in two parallels. I use lean to help people, not to blame people, right? Because people they're one of the pillars, respect to people, right? It's a pillar of lean. And that's 100% accurate. And I focus on the people aspect and the leadership development by teaching those that are around me also how to look at processes, to ask the question behind the person and make them understand when we come down and something goes wrong, you want to let the person know that mistakes are going to happen, right? Now, human failure is just a way of life, skills-based, knowledge-based, it doesn't matter. Slips and lapses, most know the common terms that exist in there. But if you understand mistakes, then you'll understand not to use your role as a leader and understanding of process improvement to blame them and ask them about their failures. You ask them about how the process could be better to support them. So the people side of it, to me, and I think what shifted, you'll hear the term, you catch a lot more flies with honey, right? I look at lean as the honey. If I come down and say, hey, look, I understand things are happening. I'm here to make your process better. I'm here to make your life better so you can learn from that. What my hopes are that when somebody underneath them does something wrong, they won't initially jump to the reaction that it was an intentional mistake, a violation of some sort. So people are 100% the reason that I do process improvement. I am focused on the process improvement, but largely from the aspect of supporting the people and keeping them out of fire, keeping them out of the fire, for a lack of better terms. And that's where I developed as a leader. And what I found is when I stopped going into my boss's office and blaming people for the reason that we didn't accomplish a task. And I came in and say, listen, this is the process that didn't work well. We can get the people to this point. It changed the dynamic with my leadership. And then I could go down as a mentor to the others and say, hey, look, we're not, we're not here to discuss your part of this problem. We're here to discuss the process that led to that kind of thing. And when people saw me coming, as I grew up, when I was a young NCO, if somebody saw me coming, they would cringe because they know I was coming to yell at them, because at that point, I didn't understand the impact of my actions to them. And then what did they do when they started growing up to be leaders? Well, if I got yelled at as a leader, I'm going to yell as a leader. That must be how we do it. And as I started to look at processes as a way to support people, as opposed to yell at them, those below me started doing the same things, and they started taking on those attributes as well. And you would see it as I grew from echelon to echelon in the military, those that I supported changed how they interacted. I would tell them, what's going wrong in your organization? What are you not getting? So I don't know if that gets it, but that's what we focus on. Is the answer is the people. It's not the question.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think some of what you're saying is just it leads me to think. So you're talking about obviously a mindset change for you over the years. You mentioned the word curiosity a couple of times, and I always look at curiosity on a scale or a continuum from judgment to curiosity, and it sounds very much like one of the things that you mentioned as something you've learned over the years is to move from that judgment of people towards curiosity. And obviously the whole area of lean and process mapping helps you to do that. But I think that's really, really important for young leaders to understand, that that's a really important aspect of leadership, is that we don't go in and blame or judge, that we always seek to understand. And you made those points very, very well. I'm also wondering how you mentor somebody. So a popular kind of, or a common issue that I would see with young leaders is the jump from leadership, or the transition from a regular role as a team player into a leadership role. And sometimes what I see is people not understanding that it's not all about them anymore. So it's not about their performance or what targets they hit. They now have to look at maybe success or achievements as what the team achieves, not what they achieve. So, and I think that's the same goes for anything you're doing in lean or process improvement. But as a mentor, how do you work with people to help them understand, help young leaders understand that it's not about them anymore. It really is about your team. So what would you say to people to help them understand that?
It's interesting. I actually have a process for that. Imagine that, a process to help with leaders, right? And, first part of it is defining leaders and leadership, right? There is a difference there. Leaders are in charge. It's a position of authority. Leadership is a quality. It's something that we possess that people gravitate towards. And when we move people from team members into these leader roles or leadership roles, and like I said, that term gets universally used from my perspective, there's a different aspect. You're assessing their ability to work in an authoritative position without overusing that authority, but you're also looking at them from how are they perceived. That's how I personally kind of judge leadership. How are those that are around you react to you? Are they following you, or are they opposed to what you say? Are you the guy in the room that they turn away from, or are you the guy in the room they turn to, whether you're in an authoritative position or not? And when I'm working with, we'll go back to the military for a minute, young soldiers into young NCOs and young warrant officers and the seniors. The questions that I ask them are, do you understand the difference between the two of those? Do you understand how to separate the authority you have to make decisions from the leadership roles that you use inside of the organization? And just like you said, Catherine, how do you get them to understand it's the team, not the person? One of the processes I ask them all the time is I ask them, I'm like, list the successes of the section, of the unit, that have happened over the last 6 months to a year. Now, usually we have to keep a running tally because we have report cards, performance reviews, much like industry does. We have awards, they get submitted. So I'll ask them, list this section's, your motor pool, for instance, or your unit's achievements. And then next to those achievements, I want you to write down how much you directly contributed to those, and then how much others directly attributed to those or contributed to those. And when you start putting stuff on paper and you start laying down all of the things that led to the success of a task, and you start looking at names next to it, well, we did these 35 things led to this end state, and only 5 of them did I actually do or directly responsible for. Everything else were my team members. It starts to show them of 35 tasks, you were 5. With 30, without those 30, you wouldn't be successful, or your leadership or leader role wouldn't be as viewed as success, because without your team, you never would have got there. So anytime you walk into an action, something from an authoritative position, you need to break that down and understand where your team plays into the contribution, into the success of that task. And then not only and from the leadership perspective, know your part, but know how to support them in the things that they have to do as well. And that's why when we grow as leaders, we take on multiple hats, if you will. Be the leader that makes decisions, but understand the leadership required to support them to make you successful. And you can almost, I won't say quantify that, but you can qualify that to an extent when you start looking at contribution of task to completion. And that's just kind of how I start bucketing things in my head.
Yeah. I like that. I like that. I've never heard that be put, or that exercise the way that you do that, and I might have to steal it, because I really like the idea of visually seeing that and writing up the tasks and putting names, and then using that as a way to explain leadership versus the position of leadership versus your quality of leadership. I love that. So thank you for that. That's good.
Well, we direct the value added to that as well. Like, let's talk about process improvement. When some people will ask, well, how do you lay out a lot of the soldiers or leaders now that I work with, the organizations I work with, they're like, well, how do you define those? Well, it's very simple. What adds value to the process that you're trying to get to, which leads us to discuss what constitutes value added and what doesn't. So it just digs in. That's where process improvement links into this leadership aspect. Mm-hmm. We use our process improvement language, if you will, as a way to size that out.
Right. Yeah, that's good. And I have to imagine that in the 24 years you were in the Army, and then now afterwards continuing to work with soldiers and other young leaders, not just in the military, but outside of that, I have to imagine that you've been able to witness and even mentor young leaders through their mistakes. And you mentioned a couple of different ones, but can you expand on that a little bit, and maybe even give us some examples of some of the leaders and what their mistakes were, or maybe just the top mistakes? I'm sure you've experienced a lot, but what are some of the top mistakes that you see young leaders making?
Yeah, it's so, especially, moving past the military and industry, because it is a very different dynamic. With the military part of the side, leadership, again, does come with this hierarchy that's very well known, but that doesn't exist in industry. And when I work with some of these department managers, and I work for some of those that are employees that are coming up through in there, a lot of the mistakes that you'll see, they parallel, but it's almost an unstable ground. A confident soldier is almost a given. A confident employee is interesting, because there's almost this false confidence that you see. They want to be perceived as confident, but they're really kind of lost in the middle a little bit. And again, so what they'll do is they'll try to overperform. I always kind of tell everybody not to parallel this back to the military, but in the military, we're very team oriented. When I move from one unit to the next unit, I'm already on the team. Just by the virtue of me being a soldier, I'm accepted in day one, just like that. Industry, I don't see that. In industry, you have to earn your way into that team, which means you have to earn your way into those roles, which means when you get into them, there's this perception from what I'm dealing with in industry where they feel that they have to have all of the answers. In the military, I'm not afraid to ask. In industry, I am. Because if I start asking questions, somebody around me is going to question whether or not I belong in that role, and do I have what it takes to succeed in that area. So a lot of the mistakes that I see are the same ones I made as a young soldier: overconfident, making assumptions, filling in blanks. And you'll see them say, well, and I'll ask one example. I work with a company right now, and there is trying to think of, make sure I don't mess up the NDA. The company has a very specific process, and you move up, right? They bring seasonal workers on and they develop them, and then they bring them into full-time hires, and then they develop them, and then they actually become into the leadership roles for each of these different functions inside of the factory. And there is in one of those pivotal moments where they're bringing some of their full-time workers into management roles as some people are moving out of state. And the mistakes that you see being made is when they get into that role, they still think like they're on the team as opposed to in charge of the team. And they have trouble making that distinction. A lot of that is because they're being promoted from within, And there's a lot of organizations where, you know, like, well, if they're good at this job, that must mean they'll be good at the next job as well. And assuming that, you know, the business makes the mistake assuming that they know how to function at the next higher level. The person makes the mistake of thinking that well, no, they won't make the mistake of thinking, they make the mistake of not understanding what the next role requires. So they would get into that role and they just try to do that part better. And they don't take the time to start to understand, well, okay, now that I'm in charge of the team members and not just the team member, what are the additional things that I have to do? And they just start again, making those assumptions, filling in those blanks. So we have to get them again to sit down and understand, like, hey, what is it you think you're responsible for? What processes do you manage now in this leadership or management position? And usually when I get these young leaders in industry, they don't have an answer to that question. So then again, I go back to their leadership and say, hey, when you promoted them into this position, did you define and clarify what your expectations were? And again, usually if it's anything at all, it's very ambiguous, because well, no, they watched the person that, you know, they've been here. They're here long enough to know what's happening in this organization. We know we shouldn't have to keep telling them we promoted them because we believe they can do better. Okay, but again, your mistake to not clarify is now translating into their mistake on the floor, which is now costing you quality, which is costing you money. That's the largest mistake, is the continuity and consistency and clarity from the top to the bottom in expectation management and execution.
You mentioned some of the mistakes, more of the mistakes there, Phil, and yeah, I've seen it as well, you know, overconfidence, sometimes underconfidence, sometimes it's lack of skills. It could be related to emotional intelligence skills like communication, conflict management, could be anything. Different people are different, and different leaders, you know, have different skill gaps. And you said something interesting. We have got to get people, you know, to sit down and think about this, think about what am I doing well as a leader, and where are these gaps? And you know, I agree that I don't think that happens enough. I think young leaders are put into these positions, and it's all about, what do I do? You know, what does my to-do list look like? Here's all the work you have to get through. But what should young leaders do to really step back sometimes and do more of that, more introspection, you know, grow their self-awareness of who they are and how they are as a leader? What advice would you have for young leaders to kind of build more of that into their professional development?
Yeah, you know, that's such a great question too. You know, in my opinion, it's sometimes leaders will think that the only way to get ahead is to work extra, and they take on extra stresses. So they sit at home, but when they sit at home and they try to answer those questions by themselves, they're not going to come up with the answers. Again, a mistake that they make is thinking that they have the ability to conjure something from nothing. So the answer to the question may feel like the wrong thing for them. It's sitting back down with your team. When you get into that leadership perspective, it's not them figuring out on their own, and it's going to have twofold. You're going to sit down with the team. What do you expect from the leader of this team? What in your mind? I would be asking those underneath of me, like, hey, you know, we're just Phil, Catherine, and Patrick right now. We're not Sergeant, Chief, or sir, or ma'am, or boss, or whatever it is. Let's just have this conversation. Get them away. First off, get them away from the organization. Get them outside of the building, so you don't have those roles associated with you. You know, let's go somewhere. Let's go to breakfast or go to lunch. And then part of answering the question of what I think I should be doing as a leader is to understand what my team expects of me as a leader in that role. I don't want to talk about what the person did before me here. I want to talk about what a leader is in your mind that supports your day-to-day tasks. And then, you know, start making those assessments, and we can become self-aware. Understanding what the people's requirements are starts to allow me to answer in my head, do I meet that requirement, or do I not meet that requirement? And if I don't, I can ask the team for more clarity, because my leadership is ultimately going to lead to their success. So the answer, in my opinion, for them is to not to self-isolate and figure it out and get into this isolated silo. It's to get back with your team and open up. Figure out what those things are from their perspectives. You know, the fine balance to that is reminding them that at some point leader decisions have to be made, but at least they should be made off of hopefully understanding what their requirements are. So it's more communication, not less communication.
Mhm.
And would you think the one-to-ones are really important as well there with your manager? Just time to just stop and
Oh
think.
yeah.
I agree with you. Going to a team, getting feedback, hugely important. But I also think that time and space where someone's just asking you powerful questions, has your own manager has a good, coaching approach, and you have time to just stop and think about these things as well is probably, I think, important too. Would you think?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You look at research methods. When you don't know anything, you ask the masses. When you have some pretty good ideas of what it are, you start isolating on the people, and it's the same thing. Get the ideas from the masses, but yeah, the one-on-ones are imperative. I mean, I'm not even sure that's an option at this point because you can't get to a clear and concise answer unless you isolate the conversation. And in those one-on-ones give that. And hopefully by that time, the one-on-ones make the team members comfortable enough to tell you the good and the bad, right? If they see in a team environment that you're not out there as judgmental, again, one of the things we always tell them, be curious, not judgmental. That's a sign of a good, and that's it. When they see that there's curiosity, hopefully when they come in for the one-on-one, they know they're not being judged. And what we are looking for is real feedback, but you get an opportunity to say things you might not say in a team, right? Because the team members, while they're while we're having a conversation focused on leader or leadership, they're judging each other. It's just human instinct. So
Right.
yeah, getting people separated and really giving them a chance to unveil a little bit. Oh, absolutely. I would agree 100%.
That's great. And speaking of teams, I want to shift gears just a little bit here as we wrap up the episode today, Phil. But speaking of teams, you have raised your hand to be in not just to be in attendance for the Lean Solutions Summit coming up September 24th, 25th, and 26th, but also you're putting together an elite team of military veterans or active duty, I guess, too. But my understanding is you're putting together a team to compete in the lean competition at the summit. This will be a new addition to the summit this year. I'm really excited about it. There's going to be 4 teams that compete against each other with different simulations, and it's going to be pretty amazing. But I think you're still looking for members to add to your team. Is that right?
I am. So yeah, if you're listening, you're a veteran, you're active duty, any 3 of the compos, any branches of service, it doesn't matter. We are, I would be very easy with the word elite. We're putting a team together. We'll see the elite, where that comes down the road. Because
Right.
we have different challenges, right? We're not all in the same organization. So we have 2 hurdles to cross. One is making sure that we're prepared for the scenario, but we have to learn who we are as well. We don't all work for the same organization. But yeah, absolutely. We are definitely looking for that 10-person team, I think was the number that you pegged on the board for us. And anybody that's watching that is interested, I'm sure the contact information will come up somewhere, but I would love to hear from anybody that is interested in it. And I think it'd be very good for veterans and active duty or anybody that's served. It's a very, what made me raise my hand so quickly wasn't, one is competition in me, but past that, it's the experience. This bringing together is going to get to see something that we don't typically get a chance to see.
Right.
So it's only after you've transitioned for years that you start to understand how to be a civilian again.
Right.
So a lot of these early transitioners in active duty, I'm just super excited to bring them in, not just to the competition, but into the summit environment alone to understand a different view of the world.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to have your team represented at the summit, and also to have Lean Alaska represented at the summit. We're excited for that. And if people want to get a hold of you, if they want to learn more about Lean Alaska, what's the best way for them to contact you? And we'll make sure that we throw that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best social media platform. Just find me, Phil Ranck, or Lean Alaska is on there. I regularly stick with that. Past that, emails are great, but they're kind of weeding themselves out a little bit. So yeah, it's typically LinkedIn is the best way. Or you can go to our website, which will direct you right to me as well, leanalaska.com. Really original, I know.
Awesome. Any last, there was one more thing you wanted to mention to veterans before we close out today. You want to throw that out there? And then again, we'll throw some information in the show notes as well on that.
Yeah, for veterans, for active duty, benefits, they start to trail as we go along. When we're on active duty, we have access to so many benefits, it's not even funny. As we become veterans, they become smaller and smaller, and the longer you're a veteran, the less that there is. we spend a lot of time in the military very focused on our mission, but we also have to know they tell you there's two things that are constant in life, death and taxes. Well, I got a third one. It's retirement. It's going to happen whether you like it or not. You will leave the military. It will happen. Prepare yourself for that and use the benefits to prepare for that in doing so. I'm in the position that I'm in, not because I figured it out when I retired, but because I used the Army to get me here. I used it as a training ground to understand process improvement. I used it as, a way to understand how to operate and then figure out what that meant as I got older in my career and industry. And now I'm making that transition, and I'm still transitioning. But the point was the Army gave me my start, and it did that for a lot of folks. The problem is a lot don't understand the benefits that are out there. So I would tell you, look into your benefits. Credentialing assistance is available to any active duty. Army, Air Force, and Coast Guard have phenomenal credentialing assistance training programs that have more than enough benefit for you to build into some of these credentials and certifications to support yourself getting over. Marines and Navy also, again, have cool programs which do very well for credentialing examinations. Look into whatever branch of service, whatever compo, active duty, reserve, guard. Take advantage of these, because when you're a veteran, then you start getting limited by GI Bill. GI Bill is not accepted by as many when it comes to credentialing as well. So again, that pool starts to get smaller and smaller. So yeah, my note to anybody, whether you're in the military, been in the military, connected, if you just know somebody bumped into one time and have their phone number, getting those benefits used while they're in will be that path to success. Because I'm here to tell you one thing that I found. Industry loves military leadership. They love the leadership that's built into us. What they don't love is the lack of experience that we have understanding how that works in industry. So when you get these industry recognized credentials, it's kind of your window into the future. So sooner the better.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice, Phil. Phil, thank you again for being on with us. Really good conversation. I think we probably need to have you back on the show again to dive into a couple other areas too. I mean, the experience that you provided today was really great. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'll come back anytime. I love this. This is great.
All right. Have a great week.
Great
Thanks.
to see you, Phil.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Lean Solutions Podcast. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe. This way you'll get updates as new episodes become available. If you feel so inclined, please give us a review. Thank you so much.